Welcome to the broadcast. You're listening to Knife After Death with Dr. Darren Wolfe.
Say, did you ever hear the saxophone let out an awful moan, let out an awful groan? It makes you feel so nervous, yet it's great.
Welcome back. It's Dr. Wolfe here, and we are back for another episode of Knife After Death. This is episode 33. We've got a number of topics that we're going to talk about today that are kind of integrated. And Jessie, of course, back with us, still in the shadow realm, the black and white dimension. And Jessie, I usually like to start the episode by talking about anything from the last episode. People ask questions or feedback that you got. Did you hear anything from people?
I have, with our sticker giveaway, I have quite a few questions that we've got. I'm actually super excited. I'll forward you some of them just because there's a couple that I know that you're going to be super jazzed about. But our stickers should, I'll post something on socials if it's not going as planned, but I'm planning on mailing stickers out on Monday. So.
Oh, cool. Well, it's exciting because I've had people asking for merch from me for years because a lot of people know that I create art. I do a lot of anatomical and dark type art,
which is really awesome.
I love doing that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love doing that stuff, and I haven't drawn anything in a year, but I'm going to get back to it because Jessie and I have been talking about making some merch and putting it up on a shop. And so sometimes I'll scribble a little drawing to her and I'll be like, let's make something that looks like this and, put it on a t-shirt or something. So we're hoping that we can get something, a few items up in a shop like before maybe the end of November. So people, when they're ordering, they maybe want to order gifts for their holiday season. Of course, there's nothing that says Christmas like a skull with like blood dripping off of it. But anyways,
that's Christmas.
So
that's Christmas
one thing I wanted to say is yeah, right. I did get a lot of comments. There were people at YouTube and some other places, I think TikTok, and the feedback was all positive, and people are familiar with this. People who had Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, who've dealt with it, people who have had family members who have dealt with it, and some even have passed away. And some folks that messaged me were healthcare workers who said, yeah, I've seen multiple cases of this. And so we kind of talked about in the podcast how it's a little bit overlooked. But there are people out there who are learning more about it. And who are preparing for it. When they see people with heart symptoms, they're asking the proper questions and everything. So, did you have any other things on that? Anybody say anything to you about that?
No, just same as you, just people that were, trying to make themselves more aware of it and just really appreciated the fact that we did an episode on it. So, I mean, and as, like I said, I have it currently. Still got palpitations.
Yeah.
But yeah, so just as somebody that also has it and also just wants their patients to be taken care of that have had it, I think it's great that people are so becoming much more aware of it and know what to look for.
Yeah.
Like questions to ask. So.
Well, for those listening, it's never too late to hit us with a question, even if you're listening to this a year into the future, because I know some people discover the podcast and then they go back and they're commenting. I had a comment this week that I saw from the first episode that I did back in June of 2020. And It was like an angry comment. Yeah, it was like an angry comment. And I'm like, I can't even believe like 5.5 years into the future that I even see this comment, but I happen to see it. But anyways, that's the internet for you. All right. So today we have some interesting stuff to talk about. We both, Jessie and I separately, saw a new movie this week. And by the way, this is not just like a movie review podcast. We are going to tie in with forensics, so don't worry. But there is a new iteration of Frankenstein by Guillermo Del Toro, who is tremendous. I mean, if you've probably seen his work. If you're listening or watching, you have seen at least some of his work. And he has this new Frankenstein, and I personally loved it. We're going to talk, Jesse and I are going to talk about the kind of the aspects of what we liked about the movie, but we're also talking about and this is where the forensic part and the medical part comes in. We want to talk about, like the term I use is medical resurrection. Like the reason why this came about is I had a couple of comments this week from people who said, "Have you seen the new Frankenstein? And is something like that, do you think something like that would be possible?" And I was surprised that people were asking that question. But if people really want to know more about it, I thought, well, this is a good opportunity to talk about maybe whether it's possible and why or why not. Um, and then also, we're kind of tying this in a little bit with at least Jesse and I have talked about, we talk about artificial intelligence now and then. And we will, and I'll tell you, and I know she's going to agree with me here. We do have a little bit of a bias against it. We
100%.
are, and I'm not saying it's all bad. Yeah, and I'm not saying it's all bad, and I know she doesn't think this either. Research applications for AI, I think, are going to be really good. I think it's going to help a lot of people. But using it in art, and using it with reckless abandon and not really thinking about consequences. And I think that's how it ties in to Frankenstein. So these seem like somewhat unrelated topics, but I think they're actually, that's exactly what Frankenstein is essentially about, at least in this iteration. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, exact same feelings. And even just some of the character development too. Just kind of themes of narcissism and just not just using people as a means to an end, which just seems to be so thematic. Like with any person I see so far, just really jumping on the bandwagon for AI, just in an incredibly, tremendously short sighted way of thinking. Obviously, you have like your Peter Thiels of the world, and you know, I just
Yeah.
there's just people that I respect within film. I'm mainly from medicine and forensics, but I do work in media on occasion, and the people that I had a tremendous amount of respect for, watching them just throw themselves at this because there's no point in fighting it, is really interesting to
Mhm.
me. And I don't know how I don't, it's hard for me to even articulate how I feel seeing them do things like that, but it really bothers me and it really disturbs me in a lot of ways.
Well, we're all familiar, even if you haven't read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, everybody knows the character. I have read that book, but it has been a while. I think I read it in the first part of my medical education, because I'm in there doing gross anatomy and I literally have a dead body that I'm dissecting. And it does conjure thoughts of Victor Frankenstein. And I remember I read the book at that time, and I can't quite recall in terms of comparing it with this new movie. But the idea is that, and this is not a spoiler if you have not read the book, because I mean, like I said, everybody knows the basic story that a man who is overly ambitious, who wants to do something that medicine has never done before, that science has never done before, the holy grail of overcoming death. He creates something. He creates a monster. He brings it to life, and he can no longer control it. And I feel like that's exactly what's happening with artificial intelligence, is that we are creating something that is like ourselves, but not quite humans, not quite like us. And we probably have less of the ability to control what's coming than Victor Frankenstein did with his monster. Um, so I one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we're not going to do a complete literature analysis here. I really wanted to start with what are the obstacles to this? What does this mean? Because people are asking me, do you think that a body could be resurrected. And people have, probably tried this for hundreds of years. Um, the answer is I think it would be very, very difficult. And the movie deals with some of the difficulties. Jesse and I will talk about that in just a minute. But the very first thing I always think of when why would this be difficult? And now we're getting into the actual forensic science part, is the concept of autolysis. Autolysis, which if you've seen the word, you may have read it in your mind as autolysis, meaning self breakdown. And when a body dies, um, you are on a very short time clock. A very short clock starts ticking on your organs and tissues. And those tissues start to break themselves down. And now Jessie, she has been an autopsy tech, and you know what it's like to have a body that is not fresh,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And what is that like? Yeah.
So obviously, I think things that people have seen on, movies and television, right? So discoloration, but I mean everything. It's like it's self-digestion essentially. So
Exactly. And that's really and you see that with the tissue. You actually feel it with the tissue because when an organ or a piece of flesh starts to digest itself, it becomes very soft. In fact, last time I was at work, actually it was yesterday, I was doing a case and the person was not fully decomposed. The body was not fully decomposed, but it was kind of breaking down because the person had been dead for a few days. And I had to stop with a towel and wipe off all my instruments multiple times because it was just grease, basically. Everything was breaking down.
I have
And
a
yeah,
very grotesque story about that because
I'm okay.
it's basically just fat melting off the body, right? To just break
Hmm.
it down in layman's terms. But yeah, so it was
Old school Ozempic,
yes. That's
the
vile.
oldest of oldest school Ozempic.
um but this was my first really bad decomp case. And I always laugh, like, especially like when you do like interviews, and I noticed this later, like when I would do interviews to be an autopsy tech at a different facility, they would be like, how do you feel about the smell of decomp? And I'm just like, there has to be somebody that comes into these interviews and tries to say, oh, I love it, it's fine, it doesn't bother me. It bothers all of us, it's horrific, you just will yourself through it. It's not a great smell, it's just, it sticks to everything. It's, you either love what you do
Hmm.
or you don't, and decomp smell could kind of
Exactly.
make or break you. But so this guy, very obese gentleman, so there was a lot of fat that was decomposing. And ironically, so I was kind of walking around the table throwing towels down because it was very slippery, and I was,
Hmm.
we were all worried about each other slipping. And so I I'm walking around the corner, both my feet go out from underneath me because I hit like a
Oh,
particular spot. So I literally fell on my back in the morgue and then
oh,
just had, you know,
oh my gosh.
all
Sharp
down my
instruments.
yes.
And the thing
Uh,
is, and Jesse and I will talk about this probably in a separate podcast, but the morgue is an incredibly dangerous place.
Very much so.
There are things like this that happen. Like you wouldn't predict that a person would slip and fall in the morgue, but in this case, when fat is melting, I mean, it is literally just grease being
Mm-hmm.
pouring out of the body, and under lamps. You're doing an autopsy under lights. Sometimes those lights are warm because they're surgical light type lights. Everything will get greasy, and it's a hazard too when you're holding like a knife, when you're holding a scalpel, and it's slippery in your gloves. I mean, it's very easy to cut yourself. So one day we're going to do a topic. In fact, I'm going to make a note right now on hazards of the morgue, and we can tell all of our horrible stories, and there are many of them out there. But
Mm-hmm.
back to the point, that is autolysis. Okay, that is the fat is breaking down. So I wanted to say that is the first step of why it is so difficult to do something like Frankenstein did, where he's taking different body parts. He's got nerves, he's got arteries and muscles and ligaments, and he's sewing everything together, the good parts from these bodies that he's harvesting. That would be incredibly difficult. And they do deal with this in the movie. I'm going to talk about how they kind of got around that a little bit. But the other thing is putrefaction, which when she said a body that was decomposing, so putrefaction is when basically the tissues are filling with gas because there are microbes, there are bacteria in our body and on our skin and in our mouths and in our nose, and pretty much every single square, micrometer of the body has microorganisms. Some of them, at least on the surface and in the GI tract. I mean, not everything, because it wouldn't be sterile otherwise. But what happens is when you die, that stuff starts to grow more, and it starts to grow more, and it starts to produce, and bacteria are notorious for producing gas. So the body will start to bloat. The color changes actually from bacterial growth. And so when you get those changes of the tissues filling with putrefacted gases, that would also be a major obstacle to doing what Frankenstein did. And I know that people are listening to this, medical professionals and stuff, and they're thinking, why is this guy talking about this? I'm talking about it because people really want to know. They wanted to know the answer to that question. And and I'm going to get around to more of this stuff, but in the movie, and by the way, if we are going to talk about specific things in this movie, which are not like other Frankenstein movies. So if you have not seen it and you do not want to have any sort of spoiler, pause the podcast right now. Go watch it. 2 hours and 20 minutes or so. Yeah.
Even if
and
you
then
think
you
you
can
don't
come
want
back
to
and
watch
listen
it,
to
go
us.
watch it, because it's a phenomenal movie. I took my dad to see it at the Egyptian on 35 millimeter. And my mind was blown. I was incredibly impressed.
Jessie being artsy and Jessie's artsy and tragic, so she has to go watch it on actual film. Me being a loser, just sitting in my house watching it on Netflix, because that's where you can find it. You can find it on Netflix. But I'm not as cool. She probably went in like a GTO or something, and like something really cool and old and awesome. And anyways, the point is, well, anyway, it was a Honda Civic, but anyway,
it was a Honda.
So the point is, yeah, okay, there you go. Yeah, if you don't want to hear anything about it, you should go watch it. It's actually it's the best Frankenstein I've ever seen, honestly, and I've seen multiple of them.
And I'm a huge fan of, just from a comedy perspective, I am a huge fan of Young Frankenstein with Gene Wilder. So, even those, like, I've seen so many adaptations that I really enjoy, particularly that one, but like, it's nothing like you've ever seen yet. I promise you that.
Well, okay, so now I'm going to actually start talking about the movie and how it pertains to what I just said about autolysis and putrefaction. One of the interesting things they did is when Victor Frankenstein was harvesting his bodies, they chose to go, there was a war, a battle going on, and they went to a battlefield in the snow where there were lots of dead bodies, and they were being preserved in the snow. So if you die and it's below freezing, that's going to stop putrefaction for the most part. And autolysis will happen, but it's slower. So I like that they did that they got the bodies that were basically covered in snow. And then what happened is when he took it back to his lair and his castle on the hill there, they had these very large ice blocks. So he was basically working in like an area with tons of ice blocks so that, the temperature would be lower and the body wouldn't start to decompose. So I like that the writers and the filmmaker did that. I thought, okay, good. They're explaining how that body is not decomposing, because if it's even room temperature, it's going to be starting to break down.
Just know that decomp is immediate. Yeah. Like, it's immediate. Even on like a microscopic level, decomposition starts immediately.
So actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to talk a little bit about why autolysis happens. So, and it's a little bit of biochemistry. You don't have to be, nobody has to be scared who's listening to this. You don't need to be a biochem expert. I'm going to explain it really simply. When you die, the number one problem is that you are no longer taking in oxygen. Okay. And so that triggers a set of biochemical sequelae in which you are no longer, your cells are no longer undergoing what's called oxidative phosphorylation, which means your cells are no longer producing ATP. That's the molecule of energy. That's what's causing me to move my hands right now. It's what causes my vocal cords to move and produce sound right now. It's the energetic molecule in all of our cells. Well, what happens is switches over to anaerobic chemistry. Again, I don't want to get too technical here, but what happens is this lowers the pH. That's the hydrogen concentration inside the cell. And what that does is it causes these organelles inside of your cells called lysosomes to burst open. Well, why is that a problem? Because lysosomes contain enzymes, and those enzymes will break stuff down like fat and protein and carbohydrates, and that's what we're made of. So when you stop breathing oxygen, your body hits a switch, a molecular switch within seconds, probably. Certainly, if you were to see it on a microscopic level, if you were to be the size of a cell or inside of a cell, you would see the changes. You would see them start. The lysosomes would start to burst open. The enzymes start to degrade the cell walls. And then once the enzymes are out, everything starts to melt. And so, from a technical perspective, sewing body parts together and trying to reanimate it would be very difficult. I don't want to completely destroy the science behind this, because the science behind Frankenstein is not the point. The point is what he's doing. He's trying to create something unnatural, which ends up being a real problem for everybody. And that's why we're tying it into AI. Now, whether or not Guillermo Del Toro meant that, if that's his thrust, his sort of narrative thrust here with this movie, I don't know, but that's what I think.
He's certainly not a fan, I can
And
tell you that.
yeah. So if you're listening, Guillermo, Mr. Del Toro, I'm very impressed. So biochemically, very interesting to see how that works. And what's even more when you talk about decomposition and putrefaction and all that stuff is with the frozen bodies that they took and they were going to work on. Here's what's interesting. Once a body is frozen, it needs to stay frozen or else, because once it starts to thaw, the decomposition process is twice as fast. It really starts to melt fast. And when I have a body, for instance, I have had bodies in the snow as well who have, I live in Indiana, so it's very cold here starting pretty much this time of year. And if somebody's outside when they die, the body freezes, the body is brought to the morgue, and then usually we have to put like fans on the body to kind of blow air onto it to kind of gently thaw it out, because you really can't autopsy a frozen body. I mean, no more than I can autopsy the table sitting in front of me. It's rock hard. Yeah. So we have to put the fans on it, but once the lights are on, once warm bodies are in the room and the temperature goes up a little bit, that body starts to melt rapidly. So sorry, folks, if you're thinking about possibly trying to reanimate a body, you're going to have problems here. And that's why cryogenics, is a thing, because that started in the 1960s or so.
Yeah.
People saying, well, I have a deadly disease and I want to be cured of that disease someday, so freeze my body when I die. And so, there are other problems with that. So the other problems with that is when you freeze a body, and this is why the decomposition is actually more rapid. You are freezing water, and when water freezes, it forms crystals. And what do crystals do? They poke holes in cells. So the moment those cells start to warm up, boom, everything leaks out, everything melts. And melts is actually not a bad term. It sounds like, a candle melting, but, Jessie told you her story. She literally slipped on what was the equivalent of grease, candle wax,
And
whatever.
actually, when that substance does harden, the decomposing fat. When that does harden, it's called adipocere, and they literally call that grave wax is the substance, and you can
Yeah.
actually see it hardened, and it does. It looks like thick white candle wax on bodies.
It's one of my favorite terms in forensics, grave
I
wax.
love it.
It's just, yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of a character if we were to create something, a character that has candles made of grave wax. They have bodies and they're harvesting the grave wax and then creating candles from that. I think that would be a really odd and horrific thing, but interesting.
It would
So
be.
that's the kind of thing I think about.
It's
Yeah,
okay.
that's the kind of
I've
thing I
told you
think
my
about.
thoughts, so we can talk about those thoughts on the podcast and get arrested immediately.
Yeah, yeah, we're gonna deal with that. Um, You know, and then tying it back in, we keep jumping back and forth between the medical and then between the symbolic and what do we think this means? Well, um, like I said, AI part of the rise of artificial intelligence is at its root is arrogance, right? Because we think we've mastered everything, so let's create something that's, you know, superhuman, basically. And that is reflected, I think, in the movie when Victor is a boy. He's a boy. He looks like he's about 12 or 13, and his father's quizzing him on stuff and on an anatomical stuff. And I believe he asks about the tricuspid valve, and the kid can't remember. Young Victor. I guess his dad's name's Victor as well, right?
Mhm.
He's like Victor Senior and Victor Junior.
Mhm.
And he doesn't he's putting together a little ivory model, a little anatomical model. Anyway, his dad gets really mad at him because he can't remember the function of the tricuspid valve. And he says something very interesting. And I'm going to read that quote. I wrote it down. Sort of castigate. He sort of like, really is mad at his son. And he says, ivory doesn't bleed, flesh does. By the time you remember a fact, your patient could be dead. In other words, use your brain. You need to know this. You can't rely on anything else but yourself. And I immediately texted Jesse as soon as I saw this scene.
It's a
I
great
was like,
scene.
I think this is what he's talking about. I think he's saying, and again, I know that folks are listening to this and you use Chat GPT and you use various AI models, and that's okay for you guys. But I think what he's saying is don't rely on that as a primary means to do what you have to do. AI in its best use, I think, is an adjunct, is an assistant, more than a primary. And so, I kind of took that scene as, even though his dad was kind of a jerk, actually, and I think that was made pretty clear in the movie that he was a little overbearing. I mean, he
Oh, he's a
he hit him in
dick.
the face with like
Yeah.
yeah. Jesse puts it a little more frankly than me,
Layman's
a little more
terms.
to the point, but definitely, and the actor that plays that is just so perfect. I mean, in fact, the casting in this movie is pretty much perfect at every single position. Um, but yeah, I felt like that was the first thing in that movie that made me say, I think that's what this is about. And yet, Victor, who does become an accomplished doctor, apparently, I mean, they kind of flash forward to where he's maybe in his 20s or 30s, and he's moved on to this crusade of trying to overcome death. He has this grotesque kind of display in one of those old anatomical theaters, which is a scene I absolutely love, by the way. If you've never been in an old anatomical theater from like the 1800s, it's like the best experience.
One of my favorite
Have you ever been in one of
experiences.
those?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
have you been in
Yeah.
one of those?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Back in I think it was like 2017, it was around this time of year. I remember it was November. I actually gave a lecture in one of those. And I'm really sad that I do not have that lecture recorded. It's I live streamed it, but somehow I lost the live stream recording. And the topic was like the history of autopsy. So I was standing sort of like Victor was in the movie in the middle with everyone around me listening, and I was lecturing about autopsy. It was really one of the coolest moments of my lecturing career,
That's
I guess.
fantastic. I love that.
Um, yeah, but I wish we could, I told her before the podcast, I said it would be cool to show scenes from the movie in this podcast, but we worried that there was some copyright
Yeah, I just
issues because, yeah, not only audio, but like YouTube flags for copyright. So if we were to bring up the things we were talking about, we were worried that the podcast could get nuked. So yeah, we didn't do that. So if you've watched it, or if you're gonna watch it after you listen, you're gonna put this together. You're gonna see what we're talking about. The other thing about this, did you have anything to add on that one?
no. The only thing that I was gonna say after you mentioned copyright and all that, a lot of like those older illustrations from like the 1700s and 1800s and those anatomical
Yeah.
books, of course, are public domain now. But I noticed, I don't know if you noticed this, but there's Bidlow's atlas was used quite frequently throughout, even in those drawings. Um,
Hmm.
and I loved it. I love Victorian era medicine and forensics so deeply, and
Hmm.
we've kind of decided that other than just docs art, we've wanted to use a lot of that, in merch that we do, just kind of
Hmm.
in a way resurrecting like these old anatomical drawings because those books made us kind of who we are in a way.
Yeah. Well, like Grey's Anatomy, for
Hmm.
instance, not the TV show, the actual book. I wish I had a copy of it in my library, but I don't have it here with me. But those old style ink drawings are just that's how I learned to draw a lot of anatomy. I would take like those Pigma pens, those really good ink. I love those Pigma pens that you can draw with. And I would practice drawing anatomical structures out of the Gray's Anatomy textbook. I went to, like Borders when Borders was still Borders.
A thing.
And I bought a copy of that before medical school, and I used to draw and I would learn anatomy. I was just that kind of dork, I wasn't like doing anything cool like partying or having like a girlfriend. I was just sitting in my apartment drawing. So yeah, what's the point, right?
All that other stuff
Um,
is useless, so
yeah, I know it's kind of, but the funny thing is, I remember I would draw these things, and I remember I post a couple of them online, and people were like, I've seen this before. This is from Grey's Anatomy. You copycat. And I'm like, no, that's the point. I'm literally drawing those drawings to kind of like practice. So the point is, and this is, I wish we had like a little merch store I could immediately plug for you. But the kind of stuff you're going to see from us is probably going to have a little bit of that aesthetic because I do have a lot of anatomical drawings that I've done that I would like to put out there. And also, if you're interested, I did mention this to Jessie. I even though I have no time, I might create time. I would love to produce art prints that you guys could purchase, and we could number them. We could make the serialize them. I'm sort of obsessed with that, and even sell originals if I had to. So if you're interested in art, give us a message. I guess now is the time to plug the social media. Knife After Death at Instagram. Jessie runs that account. And also Knife After Death at YouTube, which is where this podcast is, but also where some of my other stuff is, some of my other videos about pathology. And then, of course, everybody knows me as the Dead Letter on TikTok. So, that was sort of my screen name over there many years ago when I was bored in the pandemic and created it. But you can follow us on those. You can message us there. You can message me directly or her directly, or
Mhm.
just go to the Knife After Death page to get updates and look at any sort of images that we might show during our podcast or talk about. She might be putting those up there.
Yes.
I don't know that we have any from this one in particular, but um, I know we did from the Takasubo case there,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I'll post some of
So
Bidlow's Atlas just because it's a
yeah.
gorgeous anatomy book. I love it.
Yeah, you all need to do what we're doing. You need to get back into that old anatomy, you know. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, another obstacle, is the electric thing. The fact that he's using a lightning bolt to animate the body. Now that's been a classic in the Frankenstein, I guess, media, is the big lightning bolt. It comes in the storm, it comes down through the ceiling, and it animates the body. And I loved, how they did that one in this particular one. He had like the metal rib cage around his body. The interesting thing on this one, though, is they tied it into it was the lymphatic system. They talked about how there is a special part of the lymphatic system in the body, and that's going to be the center of energy that I guess we want to target. One of the interesting lines was where he says it's the Muslims called it the secret circulatory system. I thought that was cool.
I did too. I like
And
that a
anyway,
lot.
that's where they were directing the electricity to. So I think some people were, when they were messaging me saying, is this possible? I think that it's, it's not a horrible thought to think, well, electricity can reanimate somebody, because what do we do when somebody has cardiac arrest? Very often we defibrillate them. We put electricity straight into their chest to get that heart pumping again. So it's kind of neat to think about that story was written long before there was any such thing as defibrillation. Um, and really before we knew much about cell biology, because our bodies do create and run on electrical currents, not like plugging your iPhone into the wall, plugging your TV in, but our cells, again, we're going into a little cell biology here. They have channels on the surface of the cell and also in some of the organelles that are sodium and potassium pumps, and also ions like calcium and magnesium. And what happens is it
Electrolytes.
creates, when you have those, yeah, electrolytes. When you have those electrolytes in solution, it creates what's called a membrane potential, which is a voltage. It's actually a voltage, and it generates that potential is electricity. That is how our cells work. And so to use electricity to reanimate a body is certainly, that would be one of the first things I would think of. And these concepts were considered long before we knew anything about cell biology and sodium potassium pumps and calcium pumps in cells.
Mary Shelley,
Um,
as an 18-year-old girl,
yeah.
was so ahead of her time in so many respects. She's just like, I know it's an age-old question. Like, if you could talk with anybody that's passed, who would it be? And mine will always be Mary Shelley, on a personal level too, because I think,
Oh,
like I said
wow.
in the
Yeah.
other podcast, I read Frankenstein, of course, as a teenager myself, and I liked it, but I resonated so much deeper with it as an adult woman. I had just started doing autopsy. My first child abuse cases were the ones that I was working on after I'd miscarried myself. And so knowing that she had lost
Hmm.
children, and that was kind of around the time where she started
Hmm.
um writing Frankenstein, that just, it meant a lot to me. And it's like, it was weird to, like I said, to have like this feeling of closeness with somebody that you've never met before. But that's my like very deep connection
Well,
to that book.
and that's what I love. Yeah, and that's what I love about literature and reading in general is you everybody has something, someone that they can read, a story they can read, and they can connect with it so strongly that it really kind of, it changes their thinking, it changes their artistic vision.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, things like for instance, I'll be honest with you, in high school, I was a kid that I did kind of feel like I was smarter than the teacher, which is not good. That's not good. Don't, kids, if you're listening, don't do that. But
How
I
Victor
kind
of
of felt
you.
like a lot of what I was getting taught was Yeah, I was honestly, I was very Victor Frankenstein here, minus the cutting up of corpses. I do that now though. Um, yeah. And I was not a great like student, but I remember the literature so well. We had I went to this little small school in southern Indiana, but for some reason we had like really good English teachers. And I remember I connected so strongly with the book Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I absolutely love that book. And I was a totally bad student like during those years, and I was in advanced English, but I was like a bad student. And I hated all the books that our teacher made us read. But when I read that one, I was like, okay, now this is my jam. Now why? I don't know why, but it revealed something about human psychology in groups. And again, I'm not trying to go on a literature rant here, but the point is is that Jesse, very big Mary Shelley fan, connects strongly with it, and I totally respect that. And I'm telling folks who are listening, don't just listen. Go to the library, grab some books, read. Even if you've hated to read your whole life, go ahead and find something. You'll find something that you might connect strongly with. I did really enjoy Frankenstein when I read it, but it's been like 20 years since I read it. I remember it was a little dense. I remember going and sitting in a state park and reading it under trees. It was very like, 1700s of me to do that, but I very much enjoyed my time reading that book. And then to apply it to this movie that we just watched, in preparation for the podcast, I watched it twice. And I don't really have time to watch movies, but I made an effort to watch it twice. And I picked up so much more stuff the second time, and I probably would the third time as well. Um, I love how they went into Frankenstein's sort of backstory when he was out wandering through the forest on his own after he sort of escaped the castle. I felt that um, which was interesting because we're kind of talking about reading and literature, and he was reading this monster who has somebody else's brain or whatever was actually reading to, and I don't remember the character's name, but the old guy. Do you remember his
Yes, the
name?
old, yeah. And then that was another thing that I'd written down. Unlike what we're going to see with, the artificial intelligence that is currently taking over our own lives, um, I think that that is the thing that sets it apart in the sense that, he was capable of empathy. That's not,
Hmm.
you know, artificial intelligence is not capable of like very human emotions. Like, I think the two that I cling to the most are compassion and regret. Those feel very like the most human to me. And
Hmm.
AI is not going to be capable of regret. I can tell you that much. So when it's generating responses for doctors to then apply to patient treatment, that's incredibly dangerous.
Hmm.
And then just
Well,
compassion for other people.
exactly. And I, of course, one of the things I love in movies and art and literature is symbolism. And sometimes maybe I'm looking for it too much. But the one person who seemed to trust Frankenstein the most was the guy who couldn't see him,
Mm-hmm.
literally a blind man. And I feel like maybe what they were getting at there, again, I'm a little bit out on a limb here, is that you can't see with your own eyes, but you're trusting it. You're trusting this artificial creation, and you don't see anything wrong with it because you can't see what it's doing. And that old man to me was that character. um and Victor, I'm sorry, the Frankenstein's monster, he was not like a he seemed like a kind of a nice guy actually once he started developing his own ways once he left the castle. So it's not totally, but it was, the guy gets totally out of control, and that's the whole point. The monster gets out of control, and I don't want to spoil the whole scene with the older guy who was blind, but that was like his one friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then as we were talking about um, with AI and medicine, of course, now that is a topic that it's very important to me. it's very important, and it's so important. I can't just glaze over it today and say, okay, I'm done with it. We've talked about it. I'm literally probably going to need to do a series on it, whether I do it myself or we do it on this podcast, to talk about why it's not a great idea. And my, I guess the simplest way I can put it is that AI will always give you an answer, but it may not be the answer. And that's because this creation that works on its own, it can be autonomous in some ways. Of course, you can go into questions of, is it conscious or not? I mean, I'm not even going to go that route. But if you put input data or you ask questions to an artificial intelligence, and I'm thinking even in terms of medicine here specifically, you're never going to get, I don't know. With a physician, with a healthcare provider, you may get, I don't know. And that is an okay answer, because that means we just need to look into it more. When I think about AI in medicine, a lot of people tell me, hey, you're a pathologist, you're going to be put out of a job because all you got to do is feed images into a computer, the computer learns it, and you're out of a job. Of course, I do autopsies, so that doesn't really apply to me. But as surgical path, people who don't understand how it works, I understand why they think that. But the problem is that there is a human being awaiting an answer that is a possible life-changing answer. And so and this is a rhetorical question, are you going to trust a computer to tell you that you have cancer? Or would you rather have a human being look at that and decide, or maybe confer with others? And that's my problem with AI in terms of diagnostics, is that a physician, there are arrogant physicians, don't get me wrong. I've even been accused of it.
Well, actually, that's another
arrogance
thing.
Comes with,
Victor himself,
yeah,
and I think I heard Del Toro and Oscar Isaac talking about the fact that he seems almost like more like a rock star, like a musician, than a like actual doctor. And I was just like, those of us in this profession know for a fact that there are physicians that think that they are rock stars, and that's probably where they should have gone, because they're too worried about driving their Mercedes than actually coming in and taking care of their patients, and they'd rather always be right. And they don't, there's a certain type, and it actually, like, it pertains both to artists, because I've known plenty of those, and physicians, where it's, the scariest person that I have ever met in my life is the one that doesn't know when they're wrong, does not know how to apologize, is incapable of experiencing remorse or regret. These narcissistic types that walk through life viewing everybody as just like cogs in their own life's desperation. And those are terrifying humans to be around. And the scariest thing about them too is because they have a certain level of intelligence. Like, I think we struggle a lot by thinking that depth or eloquence equates to integrity, and it does not.
And I couldn't agree with you more, because when we talk about arrogance in medicine, and really any field, you don't want to be so confidence is good, but you don't want to be so confident that you're going to give wrong answers just because it makes you feel better to think that you're always right. And certainly there are doctors guilty of that. I mean, heck, if you look at social media, I know a few doctors on social media right now that are much more interested in showing off their Lamborghini than they appear to be taking care of their patients. I would be concerned about that, honestly, if and I am a doctor on social media. I'm on more than probably any other pathologist, right? But you have to have some humility. And certainly, if I did have a Lamborghini, I'm not going to show it off to people. I'm not going to say, here's my Lamborghini, because when I'm online, I'm more concerned about teaching my field, my medical field. And, but I think in terms of, tying it back to AI is the ultimate in arrogance, in that creation can never admit that it's wrong because it doesn't even know that it's wrong. You input the data, it assesses the data, and it spits out an answer. And a fair amount of time, it's probably correct. And one of the headlines you'll see is something like Chat GPT or some AI program passes, medical board exam. Well, that's great. Medical board exams are important to pass, but those aren't patients. When you really start practicing medicine, you realize just how many variables there are. And board questions give you 3 variables, and you got to figure out the answer from 4 choices. Real life gives you hundreds of variables per patient, and it could be something as simple as a little cafe au lait spot on the body that makes you think that they might have a neurofibromatosis gene mutation, which implies a bunch of other things. If they have hearing loss, okay, well then maybe they have acoustic neuroma in their ear. So it's just like all of this stuff. So yeah, I get very upset when I think, and people, of course, they always say to me, well, Dr. Wolfe, you think it's going to take your job. That's why you're so upset about it. No, that's not correct. I'm upset because I'm afraid that there are going to be more people harmed than helped by something that just spits out an answer.
Precisely.
So, and I think that, yeah, well, and, as I said, and this is another thing I wrote down from the movie, this is my favorite quote in the entire movie is, the monster finds Victor, who is on the run trying to escape him because Victor realizes he's created a major problem. He tries to destroy the monster multiple times. It doesn't work. Interestingly, because this monster regenerates, which we can talk about that a little bit.
I was going to ask you a question about that, actually, just like from a theory. And again, this is antithetical to science in some capacity, so bear with me. Yeah. But I told you last night when we were texting about it, it was could that have anything to do with, and obviously it would have to occur everywhere, not just in the liver, but LPCs, like
stem cells. Yeah, because I mean, he gets shot, he gets stabbed, he gets blown up, he gets burned, he gets all sorts of injuries, and he regenerates. He can't die. And so is there a scientific, and I'm glad you mentioned that because that's kind of the last part that we want to cover for the medical portion of this Frankenstein thing is, can that be possible? Well, regeneration is something that medicine has been trying to do for a long time. Certainly there are organs of your body that can regenerate, like the liver, which I found it interesting that Harlander, the character Harlander, the arms dealer guy, he kept referring to Victor as Prometheus.
Yes.
And Prometheus is the figure in Greek mythology that has his liver eaten by a bird and then it grows back. But the bird comes and eats his liver every day as like a form of torture. Like Victor is Prometheus. And essentially that's what Victor becomes, because the monster keeps finding him and says, "You're not getting away because you created me, and I don't want to be alone. So you're going to be the one who's with me." And the quote that I was going to point to, well, first of all, you said, could that be possible with liver progenitor cells? I mean, theoretically, you could regenerate anything with stem cells, and that's what they've been trying to do with spinal injuries, spinal cord injuries, brain injuries, any type of neurodegenerative type thing. Can you use stem cells? Well, we're very early in terms of the history of science in being able to find out if we can successfully regenerate something in a living person with stem cells. Now, we do bone marrow transplants and they work great sometimes. Liver regenerates. I think the time is coming when they're going to be able to give you a progenitor cell for a particular problem that you're having. Let's say you have most of your thyroid removed or something due to a tumor. Maybe they're going to be able to regrow more thyroid and put it in there, or just put the cells in there. So on a purely theoretical level, sure, regeneration is possible, but not in such a rapid time frame that is depicted in this movie.
Right.
This is the I believe there's a scene where he was shot with a rifle 2 or 3 times. He dies, but then he wakes up the next morning. So clearly it takes a few hours for his regeneration, which I did find that to be a really interesting part of um, this movie. And I don't know if that was a part of the original book. I don't think it was.
One of my
I think that
favorite
was kind of a new
scenes,
take on it.
one of my favorite scenes was and I had to like stifle myself when we were watching it so I didn't disrupt anybody, but it was so funny when he hands him the stick of dynamite and he's kind of just
Oh,
standing there holding it like this. And there was like almost a look
yeah.
of relief on his face, like finally this is gonna do it. I finally get to die.
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
part
yeah,
about
exactly.
sent me into space. I was that got me good. That was too funny.
Yeah, because he essentially realized he's suffering. He doesn't want to be alive anymore.
Yeah.
He's a creature that people they become fearful of when they see him. He says, "I don't want this existence anymore." He tries to blow himself up with a stick of dynamite. It does not work. He regenerates, and again, I think that this is an allegory for AI because
Hmm.
once you create it, it cannot go away, and it is going to keep coming back and coming back and coming back. Now, there are corporate interests right now who are forcing it on us, but regardless, if it were to become, sentient or be able to create itself, like code it, copy itself, um, this is the Frankenstein's monster for us, is artificial intelligence. It won't be able to stop itself. It probably wouldn't even want to stop itself. And we won't be able to stop it, which is exactly what happens in the movie. Victor tries, he fails. The creature tries, he fails. And then finally, the creature says, and I'm going to quote, this is my favorite line in the whole movie: "You may be my creator, but from this day forward, I will be your master." Absolutely love that line of the movie because, again, I may be totally off, but I think this is an allegory for artificial intelligence, and we have created it, and it is already becoming our master. As I scroll through my social media feed, 50% of my of the posts I see, the images I see, or the videos I see are AI generated.
You know what's interesting about
And
it
it's
too?
make Yeah.
Even as like, we get all these like Sora updates and all that,
Hmm.
everybody keeps talking about like, oh, it looks so, real, or it looks so good. And I'm like, it's has in a lot of ways it has very little to, and I found this interesting just from a human perspective, it has very little to do to me what it looks like. It's how it makes me feel. Like there's a lack of human to it, to the point that I'm not seeing the lack of human with my eyes. Like I'm feeling it with a different part of myself. And I don't know what that is, but that's how I know
Yeah.
sometimes. It's not necessarily a look, or it's very strange. It's a very strange feeling.
Well, ultimately, and this is something I believe, I think others probably believe it as well, is that creation itself is such a deeply human um, trait. To
Yes.
create something based on our experiences and based on our emotions, based on everything that's happened up to that moment. When I sit down to draw or I paint, whatever I've created is kind of a summation of my life, or maybe it's a little biopsy, a little piece of my life. And I can create that in a way that is reproducible sometimes. I mean, if you look at my drawings from 20 years ago and you look at my drawings today, you can see elements that say Darren Wolfe did that.
Yeah.
And artists are like that. And I believe that that signature, it's what you don't see in artificial intelligence because it is a copy, and very often a copy of a copy. And what happens when you copy a copy? It looks like garbage.
And it
And
degrades. I mean,
if you
it's
take a
like,
zero, yeah, if you take a Xerox of a let's just say a document, and you copy it 10 times, by that 10th copy, it's really pretty grimy and difficult to even um, it's unintelligible.
right.
And I feel like AI at this point, we're still very early in the game, but it's learning from other AI. It's learning from itself. and it may be copying human emotion or human behavior or human output, but I have never seen a piece of AI art so far that makes me feel um, anything. And I know other people like it. I mean, it's probably fine for
It
some
makes me
people,
feel
but
empty,
I don't
if
know.
that's worth anything.
Yeah. Yeah, well, obviously I'm a little biased, and I know that you're a little biased too,
Hmm.
because we have talked about this before, how even though we are sciency people now, I mean, I am certainly as deep into it as you can get. I was an artist before I was a scientist. Most people, if you ask people in my school from when I was a little kid, they would say that guy's going to be an artist. That's what he's going to do. And when I was setting up to go to college, I uh, said I'm going to major in art. I'm going to major in drawing and painting, and I didn't do it. I went to college and I decided to flip the script and go the science route. But the fact is, when you have an artistic outlook on life, it doesn't mean, well, first of all, you don't have to be, quote, good at art. Art is, there is no good or bad, in my opinion. If you produce it, then it's good for you. I don't really care what anybody else thinks. Now, of course, if I'm designing a T-shirt for you guys to buy, I want you guys to like it. But but ultimately, when you have that artistic viewpoint, AI is kind of an insult to my sensibilities, and I think that's why I identified, and that's why we keep talking about this movie, because that's what I think. That's why I think this movie was made at this time. I could be wrong, but that's how I feel.
And you mentioning being an artist before being a scientist, I kind of had the same experience, and then just going back and forth. My original major was in English and in poetry, and then a family member shot and killed themselves, and I kind of resurrected feelings of, you know, things that scare me. I always wanted to learn more about. So that's kind of like how I developed a love for anatomy when I was younger and that kind of thing. But then, I decided to switch my major to anatomy, biology, autopsy, all of that. So that's where that came from. But ironically, like the thing that made me good at it was the art component to my brain and the way that I saw things, because like I don't see the human body, I see it as a very beautiful tragedy. Is what the human body is to
Yeah.
me. Why I still love all of those, old anatomical illustrations. And I don't think that you can be good with people who are also struggling with grief if you're not good at the artistic part of it, because that's the human part of you that's relating to them. And that's the human part of you that wants to be
Exactly.
able to explain AFib to somebody in a way that makes sense, rather than just throw a bunch of Greek and Latin at them and, flex your knowledge or your know-how. You want to relate to them
Yeah.
on a more personal level, because of, you do have this knowledge, but it's the artistic part and the human part that makes you want to be able to explain it to humanity. And that's what we do. We translate death.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, it definitely it puts it into perspective. I mean, like to talk about this, to finish up talking about this movie with, I guess it just resonated a lot with me, with that, that because this story in particular deals with exactly what you're talking about, that sort of interface between human and non-human, and um, what does it really mean to create something? Do we go beyond our bounds sometimes? And I think we all ask ourselves that question. I know certainly I do. Sometimes I wonder why did I do this? Why am I a forensic pathologist? And
It's the
did I go
madness.
too far? Yeah, should I actually be still living in my hometown and just, teaching biology or something? Like, I wonder that about myself, but it's nice to be able to reflect, and I encourage anybody who's listening or watching, if you're watching, to think a little bit more about that. It's not for everybody. Not everybody thinks of themselves as an artist and a scientist or either or. But I always tell people it's never too late to give it a shot. It might open up a train of thought, a way of thinking for you that may change. It may help you a lot. It may resurrect feelings from the past that you didn't know you needed to deal with. That's why I do still love reading. I do love art. I love seeing art. I wish I had more time to go to museums, and I really love creating it. And sadly, I have just not had much time at all to do that. But I'm a little motivated now. I'm getting a little motivated because, we're doing the podcast and people keep asking us about, design this and design that. And so we're gonna be doing that a little bit more, hopefully. Um, and as for final thoughts on this, I think we've covered everything,
I
honestly.
know. We could
I
probably
don't
do
really have a
we could probably do a number two,
yeah.
honestly, but yeah.
Yeah, we could do a sequel. We probably could have broken this up over two parts, but I felt like it was a good way to talk about, hey, there's this new movie of an old story that I think you guys would really enjoy. And by the way, I got to tell you, there's one set of scenes in there together that if you don't like blood and gore, it is very difficult to watch. So it's when he has the bodies and he's dissecting them and there's blood all over the floor and
Can
everything.
I just tell you?
Yeah.
And then, you're a forensic pathologist. I'm a forensic autopsy technician. We have both cut into people, sawed skull caps off, taken brains out, taken guts
every day.
out. And that scene made my stomach churn in a way that has never happened when I was cutting a human body up myself with my own hands.
There was something really disturbing about
crazy.
that. I mean, I was like, Guillermo, buddy, that's something else, man. He's got the saw and he's sawing right through the leg and he's peeling the skin away and there's blood all over the floor and there's bodies everywhere. And yeah, and I got to tell you, nothing bothers me, but that scene was a little hard to look at.
Yeah.
So I'll just tell the folks watching, if you haven't watched it and you're going to watch it, it's the scene, I believe it's right after they're on the battlefield and there's a bunch of soldiers in the snow and they're basically harvesting those bodies and taking them back. It's the scene, I believe, after that one, because now he's going to start taking those body parts to create the monster. So just FYI, it's a pretty tough one to watch. I was watching it with somebody and they actually got up and left.
That was, yeah, like I said, I've cut up bodies myself. Never felt like that.
Yeah.
That was really.
I think Victor was a little more indelicate. I think Victor was a little more indelicate than us. I mean, when we do autopsy, it is to me a surgical procedure. I like to think about it.
There's also
in anatomical terms. I like to be neat.
Yes, and there's also a solemnness to it. And I think one of the best movies I've ever seen that kind of strikes that balance, Silence of the Lambs. I don't know if you've ever seen that autopsy scene, but that was one of the only ones just strictly on vibes alone where I was like, that's what that feels like to be in a morgue and do an autopsy.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen that one. I'm going to have to watch it again. But, that's another thing. Speaking of which, we're always trying to come up with topics. If you guys have topics you want us to talk about, please message us at any of the ways that you can find us. But what I was going to say is autopsy/dissection scenes in movies or TV would be a good, if we can figure out the copyright thing, because I'd like to show a little bit of the clip while we do the podcast and we could stop it and then talk about it.
We can do it if it's transformative
and then see. Yeah.
As long as we are transforming that content, we can't just sit there and watch a movie, but if we're pausing, stopping, and talking the whole way through, that's considered transformative content.
Well, like for instance, there if you watch YouTube, guys talking about, Star Wars or something, like they
Mhm.
watch the scene and then they talk about it. So
Yeah.
so we're gonna try. We'll get the knife after death lawyers on this. We'll make sure we're good to go. And but anyway, I think we are coming to an end this evening. I think that we've covered everything we need to cover with this one. And as always, if you have any questions, concerns, comments, uh, please let us know. Find us on social media. If you want to watch and listen to very old podcasts and write hate mail, I guess do that. I'm surprised that you guys think I'm going back and reading the comments on 5.5-year-old videos, but I guess people are so enraged that they have to say something. So it's never people saying like, "Hey, well, you did a nice job." They usually correct one thing that I've said wrong out of a 2-hour podcast. They'll find one word that I mispronounced or something, and that's what they want to comment about. That's a little irritating. But anyway, anything else, Jesse, this evening?
No, any links that you're looking for or any place that Doc's mentioned
No.
that you can find us, I'll have linked in the show notes so you can just scroll through and look there. And like I said, stickers for those of you that for the 10 people that submitted questions to us first. Those will go out Monday. Hopefully, we'll have a merch store up where you can find additional stickers. I'll continue to do giveaways for that. But please continue to send us questions because we will answer them. Somebody asked me yesterday in the email if we were going to do an episode, and yes, there's going to be a listener Q&A episode, and that's going to be like the entirety of that episode.
Well, not only that, it may be 2 episodes because we'll
Yes.
probably get
Mm-hmm.
a lot of questions
Mm-hmm.
and there'll be questions for her because, she's into autopsy tech, bones, things like that. And then there'll be questions for me as the forensic pathologist.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll have ones that we confer on. So we may have it as an ongoing Q&A series. We'll just try not to repeat the questions. Um, so yeah, that I'm looking forward to that. But if you have, uh, general questions about like the stuff that we're talking about today, for instance, we can address those in the next episode. We'll like off the top, we'll answer if there's something really confusing or something we need to address. But with that being said, I think that I think we're done, and thank you for listening and watching once again. And we will see you and talk to you very soon. Thank you.